everybody, my name is Danni Hewson and I am part of the AJ Bell Money Matters team, and I'm absolutely delighted that you've joined us for this webinar this lunchtime. For people that haven't been able to come, and we know lunchtime can be a bit tricky, then we will be sending out a link in an email in hopefully a couple of days' time. We'll also send out a newsletter as well with the link there. So if people haven't already signed up, they can still sign up and get a copy of this broadcast. As you can see, we have a couple of fabulous women with us today. Jacynth Bassett, who is the CEO of Ageism is Never in Style, who came with us to launch this campaign, hashtag Don't Fear Your Future. And AJ Bell Money Matters founding ambassador, Baroness Helena Morrissey, is with us as well. So we're going to be answering all of your questions about finances, helping you to try and get those in shape a bit more. Finances, they can be a bit overwhelming. And the one thing that we found is that all of you have been telling Jacynth on our social medias that you really struggle with confidence, and we're hoping that we're going to be able to do a little bit to address that today. Now, I think the one thing I want to say before I kick off and obviously get Jacynth and Helena to answer your questions is that there are no stupid questions. This is a safe space to ask any questions. We won't know all the answers, and I have to stress that we are not financial advisors, and you should seek financial advice if you feel that you really need it. But we're hoping that this will give you some tips and tricks and certainly a jumping off point to get yourself feeling a lot more confident so that you don't fear your future. There is a question box. You should be able to see it on your screen. We hope to get through as many of your questions as we can. We've had so many in. It's been absolutely brilliant. But do make sure that you just stick your question in there as well. And as I say, if we don't know the answer, give us your email too, and we will then try and get back to you with a little bit of advice, a little bit of help, a little bit of an indication of where you can go to find that answer. Okay. Without further ado, let us introduce Jacynth Bassett from Ageism is Never in Style, and the wonderful Helena Morrissey, as I say. Ladies, thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having us, Danni.
Jacynth, I want to start with you because obviously this tie-up was really important to you and has had a lot of traction. A lot of people have been talking to you about the fact that finances do play such an important part in people's future. And why did you feel that this was a good idea? What were people saying to you? Because you ran a poll as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was really interesting how, as we talk more about this conversation around longevity, which is, extending the years of our life, it's also about extending the quality of that life. And what we were finding is so many of our community want to embrace getting older, want to embrace the privilege that is aging, but many feel that aging is a privilege, but not everyone gets to age with privilege. And it can feel sometimes like something that's reserved really for only those with wealth, and it's a bit of a luxury. And a lot of comments are often, well, that's great for this person, but what about me, somebody who maybe doesn't feel so confident when it comes to finance? So that's why it was so important for us to do this campaign with AJ Bell Money Matters, to really basically help people just feel more financially savvy, confident to have those conversations. And I'll just get up some of those stats just now. So we did a poll where we asked our community how many of you feel confident about the future. And the first response was 26% feels optimistic, only 24% feel really concerned, but 50% feel a bit of both. And then when it comes to financially prepared for the future, only 14% said they feel really in control. And then they said that 35% said, no, it's just really overwhelming, and 49% said a bit of both. So I think it's really important for us to have these conversations as we talk more about getting older and aging, and actually feel as financially prepared as possible, whatever our age and circumstances.
I'm going to bring in Helena now, because we've had some amazing questions, Helena, and I think we've found as part of AJ Bell Money Matters that a huge issue for a lot of women is confidence. They feel that they can't ask questions because they feel stupid. How do they get past that? How do they, really try and find that confidence?
Well, I think it's important to start small. Don't feel you have to become an expert overnight, because obviously that would be really overwhelming and very difficult to do. You don't need to know everything about money to get better about managing it and be more confident and feel more empowered about your financial future. I always characterize it as a bit like, trying to get fit, or just you don't suddenly run a marathon. You might do a little tiny run in the park, or in my case, I do Pilates vigorously, but I didn't always do it as well as that. I started very small, and I just pushed out my comfort zone little bit by little bit. I'm obviously going to say one way to get started is to go to AJ Bell Money Matters website, because we've got some amazing podcasts, we've got lots of articles, and some of them about personal stories that might resonate with some of the people who filled in these questions and who are clearly really unsure about how to get started. And others are very much sort of factual, how to deal with, an interest rate rise, or how to, pay off debt. They're very sort of specific topics. So by rummaging around there, and obviously there are other resources, you can just take that first step, because once you do, it all becomes less daunting.
Because Jacynth, reducing anxiety, that has been the sort of overwhelming thing that we've had in as part of the questions from people. I wish they'd taught more about budgeting at school at an early age to reduce anxiety. I felt that I never did anything with my finances until my husband took over. I know that's backwards, but the terms sometimes that are used, they can feel impenetrable.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the ones that's come up a lot is like compound interest. What's compound interest? I'd say I was quite fortunate. I'm in my 30s and we were taught about compound interest at school. But when it comes to other terminology, my mum's a great example here. She also, like you, Helena, is in financial, well, she's retired now, was in financial services, but she kind of fell into it in the sense that she was a lawyer and just happened to get a job in financial services. And I asked her, how did you know all these terms? They're just so complicated and overwhelming. And she said, well, it's only because I got a job in it that I was executing contracts that I had to look up what the words meant so I could actually write the contracts properly. And you shouldn't have to be working in financial services to know about financial service terms and to know about finances. And that's what I love about AJ Bell Money Matters, is it's making finance accessible. It breaks it down, it offers support, like you say, a safe space that really, and now I'm a newlywed, so I'm learning about finance to help my future with me and my husband. It's so good as a resource, free, to help women just become more financially empowered.
Well, let's go with that compound interest then, Helena, because we've had lots of questions from people talking about the power of compounding. When should I start investing? So when should people start investing, and how does the power of compounding work?
So first, the advice is always, and that's not the technical word of advice, as you said at the start, Danny, it's, the guidance is as soon as possible, as early as possible. We might go on to, how we might help our children get started, but it's really, ideally, you'll get started early, but it's never too late. Better late than never. There's been a few questions from people in their 50s. I'm in my 50s. Obviously, we can have some sort of regret that we're going to get started sooner, but get started at some point, and then it will help. So the power of compound interest, I mean, I don't know if others have heard this thing about where you place a grain of rice on the first square of a chessboard, and then you double it on the second square, and then double it again, so you've got 4 grains by the third square. And by the time you get to the end, you can fill gazillion paddy fields full of rice. It is amazing just how, if you've got some money left in the markets, usually, even if it might swing up and down, something that people need to get comfortable with is that you may see some dips in your money if you invest. But over time, partly because if you reinvest what's called dividends, when a company pays their investors money at the end of a quarter or the end of a year, then if you leave that money in, then of course that money is going to be growing as well. So that's how it all ends up being worth a lot more than if you just say, well, I'm going to make 7% every year and that's it, because that 7% then becomes a bigger sum. Your 1.07 at the end of that year is what you've got to invest at the start. So it's quite a simple concept, but just think of it in terms of, the longer you leave your money in, usually then obviously the more opportunity it's got to grow.
So there are a lot of people who are here on this webinar who sent questions in who, as you say, are in their 50s and are thinking it's too late. You know, if I'd have started when I was 18, then of course, you know, that rice would be filling the house. But I'm in my 50s and maybe I'm only just thinking about getting started. It's not too late.
Well, you might not have obviously enough money compared with what you'd love to have. You know, either it may be a slightly lower quality of life that you would have had compared with if you started in your 20s. But as I say, it's better to start now than just to put it off indefinitely. And I think we've talked about anxiety already, that one of the really scary things is just not having any idea how much money you might have at a certain point in your life when you might want to retire or, you know, at least step back from working. And so I think it's really important. And actually, even though, like your mum, Jacynth, I work in finance, I always looked after other people's money. And then it was only during COVID when obviously we had a bit more time on our hands. And I thought I must get to grips with my pensions. You know, like a lot of people, I had bits of money invested with different previous employers. And I really had, and I'm ashamed to admit it, as a person working in finance, I didn't know how much I had in total. And I felt nervous about that. I felt very worried about just the lack of knowledge that I had. But as soon as I got to grips with that, I should mention as well, I was turning 55 when you can start to release some money. At that point you could anyway. And so I worked it out. I took that step. And I say that, you know, I'm slightly embarrassed because I work in finance as well. But I felt afterwards it was such a relief, actually, even if I had maybe a bit less money than I thought I had, at least I felt I had the knowledge, and the knowledge was power.
Don't forget, you can put any of your questions to Jacynth and Helena up using the question mark on there. Hi to Emma McAndrew. Hope you're going to ask a question. Great that you are with us. Jacynth, I mean, the thing that we get so many times from so many people is that they feel that there's never a good time to start, that they've left it too late, that they don't know enough. But don't fear your future is all about making that start.
Right. The message is it's never too early or too late to make that start. Whatever your age, whatever your circumstances, whatever your stage of life you're at, because let's remember, whether you're in your 50s compared to one person in their 50s, you can be at very different life stages in terms of what you're going through. It's never too early and it's never too late. One of the things that I've started doing, thanks to AJ Bell's website and thanks to Money Matters, is I've decided to do a bit of financial detox at the beginning of this year. And one of the ones that I realized was how much money I'm wasting on subscriptions. And I realized my husband has the subscriptions too. And there you go. You're like, we're in the same household. We've been together for 10 years and we only just realized we both have Amazon Prime. We could just both, you know, one of us use that. So it's one of those things where I think that's a great example where it's never too early to start getting to grips with it. But similarly, whether you're, you know, people go through divorce is dropping, but in your 50s it's going up. So again, maybe you're going through, you know, life stages, relationship changes as you're getting older. It is time. You don't have to be scared. Like Helena said, you take one step at a time, but it's never too late. And that message in the entire kind of ageism, age inclusivity movement is what's really getting out there, and it's really exciting.
I also
well, the questions, sorry, Helena, you carry on.
Add to that, because I also think that people have this impression that you have to be very wealthy to start investing, and that you have to wait until you've already amassed a sum. And I think it's really important to understand, and actually it's a better way to invest, if I'm honest, and I say that as a past fund manager, professionally investing, that actually it's better to keep putting a bit of money in regularly and not to try to time the market too astutely. So, I mean, at AJ Bell, and I'm sorry if it sounds like an ad, but it's the same with some other providers, you can invest from as little as £25 a month. So you don't have to have thousands of pounds or even hundreds. And then you can also get this idea of getting used to, you know, because you start, once you invested in something, whether it's, you know, your health or your wealth, you start then becoming engaged with it. And so you can then start to see, well, what happens to that small amount of money? And then how do I, you know, you get more comfortable. And you might put then, if you had a little bit of a windfall from something, you might feel confident putting that in. So again, you don't have to be worried about having to be wealthy to start with, because that would obviously be
I think that is a big concern of a lot of people. They hear the word investment and they think you've got to have lots of money to be an investor. But as you say, you can start very low.
It's funny, isn't it? Because you use the term saving and people feel safe. But when you use the term investing, people feel a little bit reluctant to engage. They feel that it's not for them. And Em has sent a question in, and this is something that so many women worry about. She says, I worry the investment may not perform well and I'll lose money. How do I overcome this, Helena?
So obviously, one of the things to think about is your time frame. So if you need this money within anything shorter than 3 years, as a minimum, really, it's not a good idea to invest in the stock markets because they can go up and down. But if you are content to leave it in for, say, 5 years and to actually try to build a bit of a nest egg there, then yes, you take that risk by investing in the markets. But over the longer term, or medium term really, then it's very unusual to lose money over that sort of time frame. And what you're doing, of course, if we take it one step back, you're not just investing in some sort of theoretical thing. You're investing in the growth of companies. And so you would, if you're really pessimistic about economic growth, there's no companies out there that will grow and so forth, then of course you might think twice. But even today in Britain, when we've got, you know, pretty doleful, kind of dismal predictions, the stock market's pretty much at its record highs. And so professional investors look through, and they look through at the actual companies underlying, and those companies naturally sort of self-select as well. If you invest in an index, you're also reducing your risk. You want to diversify. You don't want to just pick one company that you like the sound of, because that is very risky. So yes, you do have to take some risk, but you can mitigate it. And one of my things I said just now, you know, putting the money gradually also helps. You don't have to think, oh, I'm investing at the moment that everything's peaked, but just gradually add to your stake. And then only steel yourself not to look at it every single day, because that can also unnerve people. We all have those fear and greed emotions, and it's very easy to get carried away when you're winning and keep putting more money, and it's very easy to take the money out at exactly the wrong time when you're fearful. So just do a direct debit, that kind of thing. Just, you know, slightly leave it to one side, and that's how pensions often work. It's just a regular savings that get invested in the markets, and then at some point, hopefully many years after you put the money in, you look and think, oh, that's quite a lot of money, and I didn't realize I had that much.
It's that fear of getting started. It's the fear that women have of losing money. And yet, even when you've got cash, if we've all been through the last couple of years, we've seen how inflation impacts the money that we have coming in, and that eats away at your cash. So you do, if you are thinking longer term, if you don't want to be fearing your future, then absolutely do think about investing, but think about it with a much longer time horizon. And it's fear, Jacynth, which is at the root of so much.
So much. I mean, I think Manjiri, who was one of the ladies who created a wonderful reel for Don't Fear Your Future, said not having confidence comes from not understanding where that lack of confidence begins. And I think that women in particular, we are more, maybe I'm going to be stereotyping slightly, but we can be more concerned, more anxious, you know, we're and this breeds fear, and we're being told constantly you should worry about this. Fear-based marketing is something that I could talk about forever as well, and how it preys on, or rather even creates, a fear that we are constantly consuming and absorbing within us. So be able to have that confidence to recognize that we might have this fear. It's not about saying, because we get a lot of women who say, why do I feel bad? Or how can I just ignore these voices or these narratives or these attitudes, as if they feel guilty that they've even been affected by them or absorbing them. Don't feel bad. We all have it. I work in ageism and the aging space, and I still have worries about aging, right? So it is completely natural. It's about recognizing where do they come from, and that can help you overcome those fears and have that confidence. So when it comes to finance, rather than burying your head in the sand, as my mum would call it, ostrich syndrome, it's about saying, okay, I don't feel great about this. Now let me see how I can be proactive and take the steps to build that confidence and overcome that fear, rather than just kind of put it off.
We've had quite a few questions about diversification. You were just talking about that, Helena. And property can be part of people's investing strategy. And Chris Beddoe has sent a question saying, they're approaching retirement. Is it better to use monthly spare cash to pay extra on the mortgage or invest?
Well, it might depend a little bit on your mortgage interest rate, because clearly you're going to have to weigh up. You know, if you're paying a very high mortgage interest rate, then yes, it would be better to pay off that money. And obviously, I'm not quite sure how close you are to retirement and whether you want to end up with not having to worry about paying the mortgage, you know, in the next few years. But having said that, I think if you ideally have, you know, most of the equity in the home, investing to grow your actual pension pot, as people like to call it, is a great thing to do. So just I have to know a little bit more before I can say which one would be better. But many people now have reasonably low mortgage interest rates, but they might be having to reset them at a considerably higher one. There might be a penalty attached if you prepaid early. So perhaps, you know, as long as the interest rate isn't too high, put it in your investments. But if it is a bit exorbitant, then, or you're just about to refinance, then have another think about that and pay off the mortgage. It might depend a little bit as well on your own sort of risk aversity, because clearly you know you owe that sum on the mortgage, and you don't know exactly what the return's going to be on investments. So again, without knowing your exact age and time frame to retirement, it's a little difficult for me to generalize, but yeah, make that decision. You won't get it, you know, there's not a complete single right answer on this one.
And on the flip side, Helena, we had one about they're saying that all the retirement is in stocks and bonds, but can't afford to buy a house. And that is something which certainly a lot of the younger generation are really having to think about and factor in when they're thinking about their retirement if they don't have a house, or they've extended the mortgage, so they're retiring before their mortgage is paid off.
And it's a big generational thing in this country, if we're talking about ageism and so forth, because obviously, like my generation, I'm in my late 50s, you know, we all bought our own home, property prices increased, that became part of our assets, that become, you know, part of our financial security as we age. Obviously, as you say, Danny, that's not the case if you're a young person. And it sounds like from that question, that this person might actually be, you know, not particularly young, but just not had that chance to buy their own home as well. I think you do have to factor in the costs of, or you must factor in the costs of renting in your later years if you're not going to buy your home. And if you've got plenty saved up in your investments, as it were, you've plenty invested in equities and bonds, then I would think maybe it's a good time to actually think about how do you even buy a small property so that you're not having to think, you know, the vagaries of the the property market and rental costs and so forth. So ideally, as one approach to retirement, you own your own home, even if you've had to downsize to be able to afford that, and you have some money saved and invested that is obviously going to help you pay the bills and live into retirement. Many people in this country and in other countries actually around the world are looking at a bit of a shortfall at present, and that's why I'm saying it's not, there's no single panacea to everything, but let's not be the ostrich. Let's do a little bit of everything and think about those rental costs or mortgage costs as you juggle the three sort of buckets that you might be considering.
And Jacynth, you said something when we spoke for our podcast, which really sort of resonated with me, kind of blew my mind. But you said that people can experience ageism at any age. And of course, people can experience fear and concern about their finances at any age. And there are many different issues which are going to affect different generations in different ways.
Absolutely. As Helena says, so I'm a millennial. I'm on the lower end of the millennial spectrum. And even my husband, he's a Gen Z. So I'm seeing a difference myself from how he's kind of grown up and also what he's got options in terms of finance and investment. He has, you know, been able to look at getting property, things like that, which younger generations are struggling a lot more with. And as you say, Danny, yes, with ageism, it's really important for us to realize that ageism can affect any person at any age. One of the biggest misnomers with it is that it only affects people when they get older. Now, obviously, because we live in a youth-centric society, it's perhaps more prevalent, but actually more statistics are coming out now that saying younger generations are saying they feel it even more. And so when we look at finance, it's as much about helping people as they get older while also preparing those who are younger. And at Ageism is Never in Style, we're very much around age inclusivity. So whilst our core audience are women as they get older. We're really passionate about educating and bringing younger generations into the conversation. A good friend of mine was saying to me, she's about my age, you know, she wants to learn as much now that she's thinking of having a child as she wants her mum, who's in her 60s, to feel more prepared, particularly going into retirement. So coming back to that point at the beginning, it's never too early and it's never too late, but it's really important to understand we have different generational experiences and how can we prepare ourselves that way. And also, as I say, parents, oh, sorry.
No, carry on.
No, I was just going to say, and also parents not, for example, saying, well, back in my day, we were okay to do it like this, and remembering that it's quite different, because I've had friends who've had that experience as well.
We've had lots of questions about saving for kids and about helping out, and I want to get to that in a moment, but we've had a question in from someone who is watching the webinar, Helena. It's hard to understand when we're able to access a pension or investment. Is there a standard age that you would start to draw down or withdraw a lump sum, for example, and do all pension investments allow that?
So they all should allow that, because that's sort of part of the tax regime here. And I might have to just check what the current age that you have to, that you are able to withdraw the lump sums. When I took it out a few years back, or a couple of years back, it was 55. I think it's now
still 55. It's still 55. It is going to change. So for me, it's going to be 57.
Okay. So I knew we're on the cusp of something. And to be honest, I think, again, going back to this slightly frustrating answer, perhaps, it's all going to depend on your own stage in life financially. Obviously, if it's not a good idea to take out that lump sum, which is tax-free, and then fritter it away, because you need that money at some point, unless you're very wealthy indeed. But if you need that money to invest, or you want to invest in something else, perhaps you want to help your children buy a home. We might get onto that when we talk about balancing our needs in old age and, you know, what we're doing to try to help our children in life. But if you need that money for something that is going to grow and be part of the whole family's assets, then obviously that can be a very sensible thing to do. I don't think there is a right or wrong answer, but the key is not to make sure you don't leave too little behind. And you're the only person that might know what your annual outgoings are, how they might change as you get older. Obviously, for many years, people have moved from sort of what they call the accumulation phase in their life, where they're earning and saving and investing, hopefully, perhaps not doing all of those things the way we're supposed to do. And then you move into the sort of decumulation stage where you're spending that money. But usually you're not then paying some of the bills that you paid when you were younger. So you need to do, I've done spreadsheets that I regularly keep up with, just monitoring my outgoings, monitoring my income. My financial resolution for this year, shared on AJ Bell Money Matters, was to make sure that I had more money coming in than going out, which seems a very basic aspiration, but I have not managed to do that last couple of years. So work it out for yourself, and then be realistic. You know, you'll need a rainy day fund, and then if it doesn't all add up, then you can start thinking, well, how do I close that gap? But yeah, it's going to depend a bit on your own circumstances.
And if you are wanting more information on that, helpfully, our next AJ Bell Money Matters podcast is all about decumulation, and we talk a little bit about you know, that journey, when to do it, how to do it, and you know, whether or not to leave money to your kids, or whether to be able to help them buy a house, to take them on holiday, so that you are enjoying part of the legacy as opposed to just leaving them a lump sum. And Helena, we've had loads of questions from people wanting to know about leaving money for children, whether or not they should do that or focus on themselves, what sort of time they should do that. Should I prioritize my own investing or for my children? I'm 40, they're 3 and 5. I have a decent job, mortgage and pension. I would imagine there are lots of people who are wanting to help their kids, but they're worried about running out of money themselves.
Well, you know the saying, you know, put your own air mask on, oxygen mask on, before you help other people. And it is important not to be so generous that you run out yourself. If we can go back to the 40-year-old with the 3 and 5-year-old, that would be a great example where they could invest into the junior ISA. So you get an opportunity. I mean, it might be more money than you might have to spare, but up to £9,000 a year can be invested in a junior ISA for each child. Only a parent or guardian can set it up. And then that's tax-free investments. And then, of course, they belong to the child, so you can't, as a parent, touch it again. But it really would help then a child, particularly if they're that young, by the time they're 18, going off perhaps to university, that they would have their own money that they would be able to, spend and be self-sufficient, or more so than they might otherwise be. So try to use, you mentioned, I think, Danny, at the start, use any, oh no, it's your recent podcast with Jacynth, actually, that I was listening. Make sure you use any tax wrappers before you do anything else. And it sounds like that question might be coming from someone who's got enough spare cash to invest on behalf of her children. But I think, I mean, I'll be honest, and I think at a certain point, and I hope my children aren't listening to this because I don't really regret it, but I think at a certain point I was very generous, to the point where I probably then, now I've been scrabbling around sort of trying to reinvest and make sure that I don't run out of money myself. So it is very important. That's why I have this spreadsheet that work out, what is the income, what is the outgoings, how many years am I going to be able to work still, when might I be able to retire, what would be my likely outgoings then, and how much do I have to save and invest to make that possible. And obviously in that scenario, lots of different ifs and buts, like different interest rates and so forth. But it's really important to have that, rather than just sort of like, oh, I think I can afford to give them this. You've really got to do the maths. And again, this is not complicated maths. This is just about, doing some sums. And I think it's really then when you do that, you feel confident then being able to hand over money as a gift or as a loan, some people do, and not feeling that you might run out.
And we have, Jacynth, a number of people talking about feeling depressed because they feel like the opportunity to give themselves a financial safety net into later life has passed them by. And, that is creating a huge amount of anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it kind of comes back to what we were talking about at the beginning with this whole sense of longevity. There's a big conversation. There's a lot of investment going into the longevity economy at the moment. There's different perspectives on what it's about. Some people it is just about extending years of life. We're going up to people now living up to 100 years, the 100-year life. For some people, longevity really means almost biohacking and looking at how we can reverse biological aging. Whatever that looks like, regardless, a lot of it is just about living longer, and it comes back to that sense of quality of life as much as time. And we need to be very conscious of that. We need to democratize aging. We need to open it up, because a lot of investment and conversations at the moment do skew towards a sense of privilege. They do skew towards people who can afford to, for example, as I say, biohack and reverse. There's multi-billionaires who are often, trying to say that they're 40, but their bodies are now a 20-year-old. So really, we need to open up the conversation around getting older, aging. And again, this will help people feel less depressed. It will help them feel more confident that whoever they are, whatever their circumstances, whatever their stage of life, they can make the most out of the future that they will have.
So let's give people some proactive tips, Helena, because obviously when we're talking about later life, we're usually talking about pensions. And we've had a question, first of all, which is, how much do we really need to invest to save for retirement? I mean, that's, how long is a piece of string, I guess.
It is, I'm afraid. But again, well, first of all, find out how much you've got. And there are lots of services. I won't advertise AgeBell on this one, but Pension Bee and Nutmeg and so forth will consolidate your pension. So if you're not sure how much you've got, that's a starting point. I go back to my boring spreadsheet again. Sorry about that. You need a vision in life, not just a spreadsheet, but it really helps to understand what is necessary. I do think that the depression point is really important to recognize at this point, because sometimes we might then look at the gap and just throw our hands up in the air and say, we just can't do it. We're all going to be declining and it's all disaster. Of course, that is a risk if one hasn't got enough saved or invested. But by taking action now, whatever stage you are in life, then you can narrow that gap and you can start to feel like less unsure and less daunted about it. But I mean, when you look at the official numbers, they always come out with several hundreds of thousands of pounds to be able to if you retire in your 60s and then still be around in your 90s and have anything like a decent retirement. But of course, that's going to vary. We've had people talking about still paying a mortgage. We've got people who might be, having dependent children still quite late into life. So again, it is a bit like how long's a piece of string. I wanted to add just one thing quickly on this sort of intergenerational wealth. The one thing that might happen or could be considered is that you enter into arrangement with children as well, where you help them get, say, on the housing ladder, but in return, then they also are standing by if you need some help later on in life, because as their career takes off. So I think we might have to get a bit creative. And one thing I would like to suggest is if you're really, really worried, you really need to talk to your family about it, because they might not have any idea that you are so anxious. And someone might say, well, actually, I can supplement your income at a certain point, or I would be able to, I'm comfortable doing that. Perhaps, again, if you gave them some money that you might have now that was tied up in a house. So I think we have to think creatively, not just think, oh, I'm going to invest in stocks and bonds and I'm going to do a spreadsheet. There may be solutions, just it might require a bit of a family conference.
And if I can add just to that.
Yes,
oh,
carry on.
Sorry, I just think based on what Helena is saying there, in Switzerland, they've got a really interesting scheme where younger generations are given credits in exchange for supporting older generations, and those credits will be built up that then can in turn, when they're older, be exchanged to be used to actually support them in later life. If you earn enough, you can actually end up getting into one of the state retirement homes, for example. It's a very interesting scheme that's fostering an intergenerational connection, but like Helena's saying, it's being creative of how generations can support each other, and different ages can actually make the most out of their time today and in the future.
From what you've just said, and I'm hyper aware that we are now running out of time, so if anybody does have any last questions to put in the chat box, now is the time. We've got about 8 minutes left. One which we got in really struck a chord with me, is I wish I'd realized sooner that investing in memories is far more valuable than spending on material things. If I could go back, I'd travel more, embracing experiences rather than possessions. At the end of the day, it's that wealth that you're creating for later life is about giving yourself the best life experiences, Helena.
Yes, and I think it's a really healthy thing that we're seeing a more minimalist approach in particularly younger people today, that they're saying we don't need so much stuff. One of my children who's going to be 26, 27. If I sound a bit vague, it's because I've got 9 children, so it's hard to keep remembering who's what age. But anyway, the next birthday coming up, I know he would much rather have an experience than a physical gift. And I think that's a great thing, and is something that really gets to this quality of life point. Obviously, again, people do sell their possessions as well, and we might not be able to raise enough to look after ourselves in our old age, but a lot of people have a lot of clutter. And a lot of people are resorting to these websites where you can sell everything from clothes to furniture, and actually feeling not just a little bit more, financially sort of together as a result of doing that, but obviously it's hugely sustainable and helps the economy, and helps people who can't afford a new sofa to have an old one. So again, without wishing to think, okay, I sell a few of my old things and then I'll be financially fit again. Every little helps, and I do think then you have what we're trying to do here is sort of optimize our current life, our future life, our children's lives, and as I say, that's going to take a little bit of openness, not necessarily just thinking, well, I'm going to invest every penny in the stock market, or I'm not going to invest at all because it's too late.
What is the best decision you have made to invest in or back yourself, Jacynth? What risks did you take and how did it go?
Do you know, this is kind of contradictory because this is a physical possession, but I did use I actually had some premium bonds that I won a small amount, and I used it to invest in buying myself something which has itself gained value over the years. I would say that was not necessarily something I thought when I did it, this is going to be something that was going to really pay off, but it was it meant it kind of was a memory because I bought it on holiday. So it's going back to that kind of physical possession, but also it was something I bought on holiday. So it has a lot of sentimental value to me, as much as, you know, I'm pleased that it's not worth loads, but it's a nice piece of nice piece of memorabilia that has just accumulated a little bit of value, which was a nice thing to do. And I thought that was quite smart. I did that in my teens. So, you know, that was a smart move of mine, I think.
Helena, we've had a question in from Natalie, which might be slightly technical. So Natalie, if you drop your email into the chat, then we'll make sure that we get you a fuller answer. But in broad strokes, she's enrolled in a nest pension, Helena, auto-enrolled, but wanted to look at managing it better, so has engaged a financial advisor who helped, but it has a setup fee of £2,000 and monthly charges thereafter, whereas she's got colleagues who've opted for a SIP with AJ Bell. Are there pros and cons in relation to these methods for a pension? And I guess a lot of it is how much time and responsibility you want to take yourself.
So this is a choice between do it yourself or paying somebody else to do it. And that's really what you're paying if you take the financial advisor route. And obviously, as we started by talking, you know, some people are just very daunted by the whole thing, but actually can become quite a satisfying hobby if you get into it. AJ Bell does not offer paid financial advice. So we have these self-administered pensions. So again, it's a question of how much, as you say, Danny, how much time do you want to devote to really understanding what you're investing? And to the point, let's go back to this point, you don't have to understand everything. It's not like if you buy a car, you don't know how to fix the engine necessarily, or don't know how the engine works, but you can drive the car. So you can get enough knowledge to feel confident and do it yourself, understand your own appetite for risk, for example, obviously be honest with yourself about your time scale and your future needs. Or you might say, I just need somebody else to do that. And that's really your choice. But we can get more to you if you want some information about SIPs and so forth. We can, as you say, Danny, we can send some information to Natalie.
Yeah, Natalie's dropped her email in, so thank you for that. We'll get back to you. But she also added that she's 56, and I'm asking this just because quite a lot of people have said that they're sort of in their 50s, late 50s. They're playing catch up. They're wanting to get to a point where they feel that they have enough to have the kind of retirement that they're after. And at that point of time, it is sometimes just a matter of putting your foot on the accelerator, Helena.
Yeah, so often, well, you should be asked, whether it's through us and looking at what the risk of a particular fund that might be interested in investing in, or through obviously a financial advisor, should spend time with you on risk appetite. But the key is, I mean, as you get older, they would tend to be saying low risk, because obviously you've got less time to go to retirement than, say, if you're in your 20s or 30s. That's just the reality of life. But you may still be planning on working for another 15 years. And so that's where you need to be really honest, both with your advisor, if you're using one, or yourself. If you have the appetite to do that and they're in good health and that's what motivates you, then obviously you can afford to take a bit more risk because you'll be continuing to earn. Whereas some of the models and some of the questionnaires that are done are based on the idea that you might be retiring a bit earlier than that, and that therefore you can't take the risk. As you say, Danny, ideally you're going to catch up, and you only really can do that if you take a bit more risk, and therefore you get a bit more return. So you might just have to make a trade-off. I'm afraid we're all probably going to have to work a bit longer than we might have done a generation ago. I think I've done an assessment. I'll be about 90 when I hang up my boots finally on the working front. But obviously my health might give up before then, but I'm just joking. I mean, it's a while off before I can afford to retire. So that influences my risk appetite for my investments.
Funny you say that. I was listening to a gentleman on the radio this morning who's 90 and still teaching and still absolutely loving it. I hope that that will not be me, as much as I love my job. Listen, ladies, thank you so much for your time this lunchtime. Thanks to all of you for being on this webinar. Just to say that if you go to ajbellmoneymatters.co.uk, you will be able to find loads and loads of information that we've got on there. We've got podcasts, we've got articles, and we will be sending out a copy of this webinar as well for you, and we'll also send the link in our newsletter. So hopefully you've signed up to our newsletter. If you haven't signed up, do so. If people you think would have liked to have been on this webinar and haven't been, get them to sign up and we will send them the link as well. But thank you all so much for your time this lunchtime.